My name is Frank Kodek, and today, December 13th, 2013, I am pleased to have the opportunity to speak with a respected member of the law library community, Sheri H Lewis, Director of the D'Angelo Law Library at the University of Chicago. Our conversation is part of the Oral History of Law Librarianship Project, a component of the Spinelli Law Library Reference Shelf on Hein Online. The setting for this conversation is the conference room at the headquarters of the American Association of Law Libraries in downtown Chicago. Sheri, it's a great pleasure for me to speak with you today about your life and career as a law librarian.
Good morning. It's my pleasure as well.
Very good. Let's begin by learning a little about you personally. Can you tell us about your early life, where you were raised, your family background, and what your childhood was like?
Certainly. I was raised in San Antonio, Texas. My family moved there from western Pennsylvania when I was a young child. We had a fairly middle-class sort of household. I went to public schools. My big activity in high school was debate and speech, and that sort of led to my interest in law school, and into my interest in travel, actually.
Excellent. A little bit more about you personally. What do you like to do when you're not working? What are some of your pursuits, your passions outside of law librarianship?
Well, I have two teenage daughters, and so
okay.
that limits my passion at this point. But I obviously like to spend time with my family. I enjoy taking long walks. We're a family of sports enthusiasts. All of my kids and my husband play, and I'm a spectator, so I enjoy that.
Very good. Well, I'm sure that teenagers will keep you very busy. But there is life after teenagers.
Yes, that's what I hear.
Speak to that from experience. Well, now that we know a little bit about you personally, can you tell us about your educational and professional training, perhaps your early career aspirations?
Well, when I first went to college, I assumed I would go to law school. That was always kind of the career track I planned. And I ended up majoring in a foreign language, Russian actually, which in the mid-1980s was not a natural career track. It was still, again, sort of time of communism in Eastern Europe. And so even though I thought a bit about perhaps pursuing a PhD, I never really saw myself as an academic or as a teacher, which now is somewhat ironic given the work environment that I find myself in. But so I continued the path to go to law school.
I was curious, did you choose that major with a specific goal in mind, or just it was something that interested you?
It was something that interested me. My ancestors came from that part of the world. Again, I didn't go to college with an intended major in mind, and I had a wonderful experience as a freshman in college with a professor, and that sort of guided my choice at that point.
Great. So, and just to clarify, your undergraduate education was at Northwestern?
Was at Northwestern.
Northwestern here in Chicago. So after Northwestern, you've said that you were still homed in on the idea of law school, so you in fact went directly to the NYU School of Law, and you earned your JD there in 1989. And then you completed a 2-year clerkship with a federal district judge in Indiana. Can you tell us about both your law school and clerking experiences?
Sure. Being a student in New York was a wonderful experience. Unlike most of my classmates, though, I didn't necessarily see myself going into major firm practice. But I didn't really have an alternative in mind, and so one of the reasons I applied for clerkships is I thought it would give me an opportunity to find out whether I did want to practice law, learn about litigation, which was, again, what I thought I would do when I went to law school. And the clerkship experience was wonderful. I learned how to research and write in a way that you don't always learn in law school. And worked for a really wonderful judge, Robert Miller Jr. in the Northern District of Indiana. But again, it didn't really tell me what I wanted to do in practice. Although I did go into practice.
So after the clerkship, you were an associate at the Chicago law firm of Lord Bissell and Brooks for 2 years, 1991 to 1993. And then soon thereafter, you earned your MLIS from Rosary College in 1994. So I'm wondering if it was your law firm experience that pushed you into or headed you in the direction of librarianship.
I wouldn't say that it pushed me in that direction, but it confirmed my intuition that I didn't really want to spend my career practicing law. I had an unusual experience in a large law firm because I'd already been licensed, because I'd been out of law school 2 years
Right.
during my clerkship. I was given real legal work when I started. I went to court my second week. I took depositions.
Wow.
I was thrown into the mix very quickly. The irony is, if I was doing research, perhaps spending more time in the library, I might have stayed in practice longer.
Yeah, it is.
So I very quickly knew that this was not what I wanted to, how I wanted to spend my career, because I was actually given the kind of work that I would continue to have.
And so you could tell fairly soon that that just wasn't going to be a good fit.
Exactly.
Okay. So did the focus on librarianship come about because as you enjoyed the research parts of the job that you'd had, both in the law firm, but perhaps as well in the clerkship experience, or was there something else about librarianship that got you interested in it?
I wasn't really that thoughtful about it, to be honest. It was suggested to me that I think about librarianship, and I was always very comfortable in libraries. I actually didn't avail myself of library services as much as I should have as a student, but somebody suggested that it might be an option for me, and I went down to the University of Chicago, and I talked to the librarians there.
Okay. So that kind of confirmed perhaps that this idea that maybe librarianship would be of interest to you was at least worth pursuing.
Exactly.
Very good. So as we've said, you completed your MLIS in 1994 from Rosary here in the Chicago area. And in terms of the beginning of your professional library career, you had worked some part-time positions at the University of Chicago and at Loyola University, and then full-time as the reference and computer services librarian at DePaul for a year. Hope I have that correct.
That's correct.
Very good. And then you moved on to the Furman Smith Law Library at Mercer University, a big move from here in Chicago down south to Georgia as the Associate Law Librarian for Research Services for 5 years. Were these good positions to begin your library career?
They were really great opportunities for me. I had the chance to work with two seasoned directors. When I was at DePaul, Judy Gaskell was the director there, as she was for 15 or so years. Yeah. And then at Mercer, I worked for Trish Cervenka for the 5 years that I was there. And so wonderful opportunities, again, to be mentored by two very fine law librarians. The other wonderful thing about those experiences was they were both new positions, and the libraries were sort of trying to define them. And as a new person, I had an opportunity to participate in how those positions would work in the library. And in particular, with respect to the computer services librarian position, that was the mid-90s when the internet
so that was really kind of a new position, not just for that library, but for law librarianship generally.
And so from a creativity aspect, coming in and being told, teach us about the internet, learn about the internet, and then teach us about the internet, it was really a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, I'll bet. Just to catch up on the two people you mentioned, of course, Judy went on to the U.S. Supreme Court Library and successfully ended her career there. And Trish Cervenka moved back up here and is in Milwaukee for Marquette. So you talked about the computer services position as being new, and did I hear you mention that the Associate Law Librarian for Research Services was new as well at Mercer?
That's correct.
And tell us a little bit about that position. What kinds of responsibilities did you ultimately have with that position?
Sure. Trish was actually, she'd only been the director, I think, at Mercer about maybe a year when I was hired for that position, and she was trying to rebuild the staff. There had been some changes, and she really wanted to develop outreach programs for students and for faculty. And so this position was really designed to do that.
Did you gain supervisor experience in that in that role?
Not in that role specifically. I actually was not responsible for managing any individuals, but I coordinated projects.
I see.
And so I got that type of
Sure.
experience.
Very good. Well, in 2001, you returned to Chicago, becoming the Associate Law Librarian for Public Services at the D'Angelo Law Library here at the University of Chicago. I perused the long list of library leadership positions you've held during your tenure at the University of Chicago. It seems like, at least my intuition there was that this was the perfect place for you to develop and hone your skills as a law librarian. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. When I was in library school, I was actually an intern at the University of Chicago.
Oh.
They were kind enough to give me a training opportunity, and I always hoped to come back. And so this was really my dream job, to come back to the university.
With the positions there here at the University of Chicago, this first position that you returned to, was that comparable to what you've been doing at Mercer, or were there expanded responsibilities?
It was far expanded. I was one of the 2 lead managers at D'Angelo, responsible for all public services, managing 5 librarians, clerical staff, student employees. So it was a promotion, really, in
Very
terms of
good.
responsibility.
Earlier this year, in 2013, you succeeded Judith Wright as director of D'Angelo Law Library. Judith, of course, is a law library legend, a 2013 recipient of the Frederick Charles Hicks Award for Outstanding Contributions to Academic Law Librarianship, and an inductee into the AALL Hall of Fame. What is it like to fill such big shoes?
Surreal is the word that comes to mind. Judith, not surprisingly, has been my mentor. She was one of the first people I met in the field. Even when I wasn't working for her, we were in contact, and she was endlessly helpful. So it's been a transition to think of it not still as Judith's job, even though I've been in the position for several months now. I think there are shoes that no one could fill in the way that Judith has filled them so beautifully over the course of her career. I'm fortunate in that, having worked for her for 12 years, I've at least seen how one should do the job, how she so beautifully did it, and again, have that as a guide as I make my own way into the position.
I often find that someone like that serves as a role model, whether or not they're intentionally doing it, as you say, just being able to observe how they do things.
That's what
is a
mentors
great
do, I
teaching.
think.
Yeah.
They don't tell you they're mentors, they don't formalize the relationship, they just lead by example.
In 2009, you wrote an article for the Chicago Law School Record, the law school's journal, titled "A 21st Century Library." As a new director, I wonder if you've begun to fashion a vision of what your library and the individuals who work there will look like as we move further into the 21st century.
It's interesting that you focused on that article, which was written after we completed an extensive renovation of our library. And so the focus of that particular article was really facilities
The
and
physical
space.
facilities.
As I sort of think about what law libraries might look at in the years ahead, the area that really strikes me that is likely to have significant change is personnel and staffing. We've already seen changes in collections. We'll continue to see those. We've obviously seen changes in how space is used in libraries, and those will continue. But in the 20 years I've been in the field, I think the area that hasn't evolved as much has been staffing. There have been some changes in positions, some rethinking of skills, but we still have libraries that are organized around print collections and processing books, even though the internet has been around about 20 years. And so I think that's the area where we do need to focus and retool, rethink the kinds of skills we need, the kinds of educational backgrounds we need to bring in for librarians and for staff.
Do you have thoughts about, in particular, the educational background? Obviously, for many years, the main degree that we would look for would be the library science degree. And then over recent years, recent decades probably is more accurate, the JD degree was viewed as important, especially for individuals who are working directly with patrons. I wonder if, given the nature of what the services the Law Library of the Future will be providing, if either one of those degrees will either continue or perhaps decrease in importance, and if there are some other kinds of educational either degrees or at least training that you'll be looking for.
I think that's a great question. I still see value in both degrees. For the library science degree, from talking to recent graduates, it sounds like the curriculums vary a great deal, and I think what we as practitioners in the field need to do is encourage those in school to take advantage of some of the types of courses that we think are going to be extremely useful in their work experience. Database management courses, project management courses, data curation. All of that is going to be very much in our future. It's not just going to be about acquiring and keeping material, and of course the services that we provide. There's going to be skills that I think we can include in the libraries that will again add to our value in our environments, and that's I think a work in progress when it comes to library school, but I still think that it is a valuable degree.
So the library and information schools are evolving as well, and they are understanding and trying to reflect in their curriculum.
I hope so. At least I think some are.
You've already mentioned a few people, but I would like to switch gears and talk more directly about individuals who have been important to you in your career, either as mentors or as role models, but also just others in the profession whom you might particularly admire, and ask if you would like to identify some folks and or tell us some of your thoughts about them.
Well, other than who I've mentioned already, there are many people who I've talked to over the years who have been kind enough to give me advice. When I first entered the profession, I was in the role of a computer services librarian, and so I joined the AALL section, which at the time was called the Automation and Scientific Development,
That's right. It was
SIS.
Go back in my memory bank to pull that name out of the hat. I'm glad you were able to do it.
Well, names like that sort of stick in your mind, especially
right.
when you're the new person, and it's sort of a statement as to how far we've come as a profession. I think that we abandoned that name and now, some years ago actually, changed the name of that section to the Computing Services SIS. But what happened to me as a new person is I was really taken in by a number of the leaders in that section as somebody who needed mentoring, which of course I very much did, but somebody whose ideas were respected and whose participation was invited, and that very much struck me. I didn't see a hierarchy in the association, and that's really been true over the years. There are so many people who've been very generous in their time.
That's great. Very good. You have served the law library profession in a variety of roles, too many to really fully list, but I do want to single out your work as chair of AOL's Continuing Professional Education and Publications Committees, chair of the aforementioned Computing Services Special Interest Section, and president of the Chicago Association of Law Libraries, one of the regional chapters. Are there any stories that you'd like to tell us about those experiences, or any thoughts about those experiences that you'd like to share with us?
Other than what I've just mentioned about the Computing Services SIS, I remember being struck early on that I was not only asked what I wanted to volunteer for, but there seemed to be an expectation that yes, I would be volunteering, and that my involvement was very much welcome. I've been a firm believer over the years that we each have a responsibility to volunteer, and be a part of our professional associations, our professional groups. We're too collaborative to be isolated. It's necessary for us to work together, and these entities help us to do that. So we have to sacrifice our own time, we have to sacrifice each other's time to really get the value out of these groups that's so important for our profession.
What you've said really speaks to what this has meant to you professionally. I wonder if there's been kind of a personal connection with participating in these professional activities and entities that you might want to comment on.
Certainly, I've met wonderful people through these experiences. To be honest, one of the reasons that I decided to become a law librarian was the people. I very quickly learned that these were individuals that I would enjoy spending my days with, that had sort of common approaches to a work environment, to their professional work and their professional careers. And so being part of the associations, being active in the associations has been sort of a natural and enjoyable extension of that.
Very good. Call, the Chicago Association of Law Libraries, presented you with its highest award, the Agnes and Harvey T. Reed Award for Outstanding Contribution to Law Librarianship in 2011. What does that kind of peer recognition mean to you?
Well, it's a bit of a cliche, but of course, when people you respect give you an award, it's wonderful. Part of my reaction to that award is I'm just doing what I said I would do. I volunteered for certain tasks, and I did them. And but I do think that awards are important in our environment because it's a way that we can honor individuals who do, again, contribute to our common goals. And it's also something that we can point to in our institutions as being recognition of the value of being part of a professional association.
Absolutely.
A few years ago, I had the opportunity to actually help create an award. The Computing Services SIS has a Distinguished Service Award that honors Ken Hirsch. And it's actually something that I'm most proud of in terms of my professional association work. But it's the type of thing that doesn't appear on a resume because, again, so much of what we do that I think is very important doesn't rise to that level, but yet, it's important to think about.
Well, I can't help but say I think you're probably being a little modest about the work that you did that would lead Call to present you with that award. I think the one thing that really underlies that award is the fact that everyone could volunteer and everyone could do the work, but not everyone does. So the people that do step up and are willing to go the extra mile for the organization are to be congratulated and thanked and honored. But this actually kind of leads me into another question I'd like to ask, both just for your thoughts as a librarian generally, but also now as the leader of a major academic law library, and that is that in today's world, where in many institutions individuals are asked to do more with less, and where resources are less available than perhaps they were in the past, it's sometimes a challenge to volunteer, to attend meetings, etc. And so I'm curious as to what you would say to an individual who might suggest that, I'd love to do that, but I just can't fit it into my already busy schedule, or I would love to do it, but I can't afford, I'm not going to be supported by my institution and the like. Just thoughts that you might have that you would offer to an individual in that situation.
I think I would encourage people to view it as an opportunity for professional development. Something that I've sort of thought about as I've made decisions about what to volunteer for and maybe what what might not be a good use of perhaps my time and other people's time, is to be a little bit strategic about the options. There's so many options, I think, in our association to contribute. And many of those won't just be a contribution to the association itself, but will give one opportunity to enrich knowledge, to develop skills. And if you approach your options in that way, then it's not simply volunteer work. It's, again, part of your own continuing education as well. I've been involved in several strategic planning processes in the special interest sections of AALL and CALL, and that experience is and has served me very well. And going forward, as a director, setting goals, engaging in short and long-term planning will be extremely helpful to me. And it's experience I really would not have had had I not volunteered for those opportunities.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I also like to reiterate the point that you made earlier about the fact that there are a wide range of ways to contribute on a professional level, and I think it's easy, or it's challenging for a new individual who sees perhaps, say, committee work or as pretty much that's all you can do. But really, there are many things that you can do, and a lot of them don't necessarily require attending in person a meeting, especially in today's environment. A lot of work can be done electronically, etc. But contributing a small article to a chapter newsletter is certainly an important contribution. Everything supports the professional organizations in that way.
It's hard to imagine there isn't something for everyone.
Yeah.
It's just a question of the right fit.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're nearing the end of our conversation, but I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to touch on any topics that are important to you that perhaps we have missed. So is there anything you'd like to add before we conclude?
I just would like to conclude by saying that I'm very optimistic about the future of law libraries, which sometimes when you read about what's happening in the practice of law and legal education and in some of our communications as law librarians, there's a fair amount of concern, might be too strong of a word, about the future. But I have a great deal of optimism because in the time I've been in the field, I see the value that we bring to the field. I see the skills, I see the talents, and I see the range that law libraries have in terms of what they can offer their institutions. And so I feel we should all take a very positive approach. We do need to do some rethinking of our work and of the value we bring, but we should do that without defensiveness, with sort of a positive attitude. And that's the way that I'd like to sort of approach my current position and the work that I do with my colleagues.
That's very good, and it's a great point to end on. I probably would throw in the idea that we can recognize the value that we offer, and perhaps the next step is to ensure that we communicate that value to the others that we work with, so that they as well can recognize it. And I suppose the other thing with regard to the need to be nimble and to be prepared to shift things around somewhat is that, at least for the last several decades, and you're a prime example of that with going into what were new positions at the time, we've been doing that. So it's part of a continuum, really. It's not as if all of a sudden we have to shift gears. We have been shifting gears for some time, so we just need to keep reminding ourselves that that's important.
I think that's exactly right, and if we see the value, then it's much easier, I think, to explain the value to others. But it does take some rethinking, and we need to challenge ourselves as well, and not wait for others to challenge us. that's, I think, a strategic approach that will serve us well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Sheri Lewis, on behalf of Pat Kehoe, Michelle Wu, and Dick Spinelli, my colleagues with the Oral History of Law Librarianship Project, I want to thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to speak with us today about your experiences as a law librarian. Your remarks will be a valuable addition to the project and of interest to both current colleagues and to those who will join in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.